Welcome, everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I'm excited to be with you here today. Our topic, performance reviews from an employee's perspective. This program is part of our monthly fee virtual events sponsored by Careers Advance. My name is Lisa Panarello. I'm the founder and head of Careers Advance, a private practice specializing in professional training and development, career coaching, and personal branding. And I will be your host. Our program is being recorded today, so you'll all receive it next week to review and share at your leisure. And you can also see past recorded programs on the Careers Advance YouTube channel and website. Okay, 2020. It has been a tumultuous year in many ways. A lot has transpired. And I recently heard some folks say that they want to just forget about it. Leave 2020 behind. I don't think we should, particularly from a career perspective. What did you do this year? You worked, you learned, you adapted, produced, failed, overcame, and you accomplished. All that is now part of your professional brand story, much of which needs to be told. When? Well, a perfect time is during a performance review. Now, employee appraisals, they do present challenges and they stir up some anxiety. I mean, for starters, it's a lot of paperwork on top of your already busy week. Some managers kind of just seem like they're winging it. They don't really look engaged. It can even feel like a one-way street where your feelings are not recognized or you have no power of influence. And sometimes it may not be a mention of the future or growth. Well, I believe you can put yourself in the driver's seat of the process. And that's why we're here today, for insights and tactics to help you not only get through the review season unscathed, but feeling successful. So let's meet our panelist, Iqbal Acha. Iqbal is the CEO and principal of Acha International Consulting, a private practice focused on helping clients advance their career, build a better brand, and create a lasting professional legacy. Iqbal is also an associate professor at Rosalind Franklin University and Midwestern University, the Chicago College of Pharmacy. Throughout his corporate career spanning 25 years in healthcare, education, and human resources, Iqbal earned more than 20 awards for his work in talent acquisition, talent development, and leadership with such organizations as Walmart and Anthem. He holds a master's degree in business administration, a senior professional human resources certification from SHRM, and a distinguished Toastmaster certification. And outside of work, you can find Iqbal busy baking salted caramel brownies for his wife, I want one of those, and caring for his 3 80-year-young parents. Next, Teresa Hamel-Kreilinger. Teresa is the founder and president of High Five Performance, Inc., a management consulting firm specializing in leadership, development, employee engagement, business communications, and performance management. In her 25-year corporate career, she served in numerous leadership roles for Fortune 500 companies, including Prudential Financial and the Allmat Group. Teresa is a certified behavioral analyst and holds a degree in human resources management from Villanova University. She's the past president of the Greater Philadelphia Association for Talent Development and currently teaches business communications and leadership courses at Temple University. That all said, Teresa is a professional stand-up comedian, and it is her work as a humorist and a motivational speaker that truly sets her apart. I've dabbled a little on the comedy stage there myself, Teresa, so we'll have to share some more stories later. And last but not least, Mary Hogan. Mary has more than 17 years of experience in human resources. She's highly regarded for her skills in organizational development, employee relations, employee engagement, and contract negotiation. And she's particularly known for her ability to create winning cultures. Currently, Mary is the director of human resources at Mack Boring and Parts, a global power product supplier serving industrial, commercial, and marine markets. Previously, she blazed a trail at Enova, a next-generation medical communications company, and Worldwide Supply, a global provider of network and telecom services. Mary has a bachelor's degree in human resources management from Rider University. She's certified by the American Management Association in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and she's certified in employee engagement software by Tiny Pulse. Well, once again, we have a wealth of knowledge and personality at our fingertips. So we're going to dive into a few key questions that I have. And during our conversation, if a question comes up in your mind, I strongly encourage you to throw it in the chat box. Okay, my first question. Completing the self-review. Now I'm going to hold on for 1 second because I want to make sure that I've got everyone that's admitted in here. Great. People are just coming in droves. All right, my first question here is about completing the self-review. Throughout my own career and in coaching hundreds of clients, I have seen many types of self-review documents. There's really no standard. Employees are expected to critique themselves against set criteria, and yet, I don't know, often the questions can be confusing, sometimes repetitive, and sometimes even unrelated to one's job. So how do you fill out these documents with any sense of confidence? Mary, I'm going to come to you first. Can you share some fundamental do's and don'ts for completing a self-review?
Sure, Lisa, thank you. First of all, I see the anxiety in our staff here when we send out that annual email about doing their self-evaluations. Don't wait till the last minute. I think that's the biggest issue. You cannot prepare for a self-evaluation the night before, the week before, or 2 weeks before. I think you have to prepare for that all year long by constantly jotting down, keeping track of things that you've accomplished, your goals, making notes, keeping track in an email file, perhaps, of anything that has come across positive, and don't ignore the things that weren't accomplished either. Be completely honest with what you're writing down. It's your opportunity to shine. I tell my staff, the fact that we're giving you the opportunity to complete a self-evaluation, that's your opportunity to let it all out there, explain everything you've done, create your story, show what you've accomplished, but also, tackle the things that might not have gone that well that year.
Yeah, I think that not waiting for the last minute. Yeah, I think we kind of, a couple of days before, you're kind of scrambling. So that's good advice. And focusing on achievements is key. So Teresa, why don't you share some of your thoughts, if you could?
All right, so there's some do's and there's some don'ts. And Mary, I agree with you. Not waiting to the last minute is absolutely huge. Hopefully along the way, you're having one-on-one conversations with your manager. And usually your manager is taking some notes throughout those meetings. You should take some notes too. Take some notes in those one-on-one meetings. And that is something you can go back to when you write your self-appraisal. And it's really just revisiting what you've already talked about with your manager. When you're doing your self-appraisal, there's 2 things you want to come out of this. One, obviously you want to look really, really good, because you are. So you want to look really good. The other thing is you want to make your manager's job easier writing this performance appraisal. You want to helpful jog their memory around, oh my gosh, that's right, we did that project 11 months ago. Because when you're evaluating 12 months, often we forget things. So make their job easier by writing it in short, easy to read bursts of information. I've often recommended 100 words. Like you said, Lisa, it's hard to say because every appraisal is different, but 100 words per competency or 100 words per goal that you have. Do not write a novel. Do not write. Now, some of you are saying, but Teresa, I want to include everything. It was all good. It was all good. Here's what you do. And this is going to satisfy that need. Write an addendum to your self-appraisal called Bob's Accomplishments. It could be 6 pages long. Attach it. Then you've cleared your head. You got it all there. But don't write it in the self-appraisal. Those are my thoughts. Those are the most common things that I see.
That's a really neat idea, to have an addendum so you do get in all the good points. And then you might want to do that on a Word doc
Yeah.
I always recommend my clients start on a Word doc, put it all out there, and you can have the whole novel and then pare it down to the summary statements that you want to answer for those core competencies and specific questions. And one thing I want to add specifically because of the writing piece, especially if we're not all born writers, I strongly urge everyone that after you write it, proofread it. And have someone else proofread it. This is actually part of your brand too, how you write. So it needs to be clear, it needs to be specific, it needs to be grammatically correct, and the punctuations. A lot of times I'll get reviewed drafts from clients and I start with, what are you saying here? I'm not quite sure what you mean. So have someone else read it so they can get a sense of what you're saying, and then proofread it so it's clear and it's concise and understandable, and make sure your sentence fragments are not floating around, that they're complete sentences. And the writing aspect of it is a big piece. So don't wing it alone. Either you work with a coach or at least with a colleague to help you work with the wording of it all. Great stuff. Well, now let's look at, once you've completed the document, now let's think about the next piece, the discussion. The face-to-face talk. Many people feel powerless during this part, and there's an assumption that the meeting is a formality. Decisions have already been made, or they're not going to get what they want anyway. So I think that expectation causes employees to go into the conversation cold. Now, I help folks change this perspective and really level the playing field. So I'd like to get your opinions. So Iqbal, what techniques can you share for employees to really best prepare for that review conversation?
Fantastic question, Lisa. And I kind of actually want to go back and touch on what Mary was saying. If this is an annual performance evaluation, so much has transpired in the last 11 and a half, 12 months. And in some cases, your performance evaluation is 2 months into the next fiscal year. So you're having to have to think back 14 months to what happened on day one to get to that point. One of the things that I have found that has been beneficial for my team and also for other people that I coach is, as stories occur, you should actually be saving them in an accolades folder and a concern folder. You can nickname it whatever you'd like, but over the course of the time frame that you're working in that year, emails are going to come about you and for you that you can file in there for future reference. Now, taking all of those bits and pieces, those incidents and events that have happened for you to be able to formulate your stories, I also want to call out that in the conversation that you're going to have with your supervisor, you really need to be an expert at storytelling. Because your job in a short amount of time, whether it's at the beginning when they ask you, so, Teresa, how was your year? Why don't you give me some feedback on how you think your year went? They're not looking for a 30-minute dissertation. They want a 3, maybe 4-minute conversation of an overall assessment. And there's a way to do that by really just focusing on like 3 positive stories in the format of what every story looks like. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and finally a moral, right, or a lesson. So if you can identify 3 of your best stories throughout the year, frame it with 1 sentence. This is how it began. This is what I did. This was the result, and here is how it impacted the company, the department, my team, myself. That's a great way to frame your stories in a way to be able to demonstrate and have that discussion. You are going to also need to discuss one potential, either I shouldn't say failure, but something that maybe did not get accomplished the way that you had achieved it to be, or it just never finished. And having the foresight to bring that forward in the conversation shows that you're not only cognizant, but you're also aware of that it's something that is either a failing on your part and that you're looking to focus on that future or continuing your efforts to improve it at the end. So I would say that the storytelling piece is a critical aspect. Narrowing your responses down to 1 sentence in those 4 categories, beginning, middle, end, with a lesson or moral, will make you really exemplary when it comes to demonstrating your worth.
Great stuff. Well, I'd like to bring Mary back into the table. Can you add your thoughts about what folks should bring to the table for this discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. To tack on to what Iqbal said about, perhaps the instance that wasn't a positive, bring solutions, take the time to, really look into what transpired or what might have been that situation that didn't go well, and bring solutions, bring a plan as to how you're going to improve that for the next performance year. I think the more we can prepare, and for these reviews, make sure you keep it short. Tekbal said, 3 instances, prepare, no, don't go in with not a plan to do your self-evaluation. You have to share your confidence, tell your story, bring your mishap perhaps, but have a plan to correct that and improve that for the next year.
Those are really good pieces of advice to help us sort of reduce the anxiety and boost some confidence. I think that preparation is key. So moving on now, you've prepared the document. You're prepared for the conversation, we hope. Well, now let's think about what happens next in the meeting. Responding to feedback. I mean, sometimes feedback can contradict an employee's perspective. And no one likes hearing negative comments about their performance. So sometimes we hit back with defensiveness. Who told you that? Or that was not my fault. Well, gee, I worked harder than a lot of my coworkers this year. I mean, we may feel this way, but these responses don't really serve us well in that meeting. So how do you respond, particularly to constructive criticism that you don't agree with? Teresa, can you share ideas of how to effectively reply verbally and even in our body language to that constructive criticism?
Yeah, Lisa, this is such a great question, because I think every one of us at some point in our career is going to get at least one piece of feedback that we don't necessarily agree with. The important thing here is not to get defensive. Recognize that that's going to be your first response because you feel threatened, but don't get defensive. Deep breath, focus on the outcome you want. The outcome you want is for you to look good. That is the whole game when you're in that conversation. So how do you look good? You say, thank you for sharing your perspective on that, and I appreciate it. Can you help me understand, are there specific examples? Sometimes somebody will say your work was sloppy. Okay, maybe that's some feedback. Yeah, work was sloppy. Work was sloppy is not specific, right? You don't really know, well, what work was sloppy and in what way? So ask your manager to give examples. So maybe the example would be, well, that newsletter you wrote an article for, there was a typo in your article that you wrote. There was. And you have to own the things that you didn't do well. But in some ways, you score a point just by being accountable, by saying, you know what, you are absolutely right. And what I've done since then is I make sure I have Iqbal review everything before I turn it in, because what I've learned is it's easy for typos to slip by. It's hard to review your own work. But the word perception is a key word here. Thank you for sharing your perception, because you're not saying it's right or it's wrong, but their perception is valid for them. I've said things like, that is not a belief I'd want you to have. What can we do so that you don't have that belief going forward? Because really you don't want them to have that belief. But the key is to keep yourself grounded. And it comes in that couple seconds after the feedback is given, where you need to get yourself deep breath and focus on the outcome I want is to look good in this conversation. Never lose sight of it. Now, afterwards, you can go with a friend and get crazy. But in that meeting, stay grounded.
Yeah.
Stay grounded.
Yeah, good point. Iqbal, you want to add some examples of your own? Bring some to the conversation?
And I think we were talking, Teresa and Mary and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, right? Like there are some instances that we've probably experienced with an associate on the other side of the desk that has not necessarily maintained the professionalism. But I will tell you, when you're there, like at the very end of the day, it's your reputation that you're creating, right? No matter what somebody else's perspective is, your action and response to a statement will actually clearly identify the type of professional you want to be known for. And as Teresa pointed out, it's human of us to respond very quickly, right? It's reflexes. We instinctively feel the need to defend our pride, defend our work, defend our activities. Take a minute, just literally count 5 seconds. From the end of your supervisor's statement, count 3 seconds, open your mouth and take a breath. That's like another 2 seconds. So now you've got 5 seconds. This is a stall technique, and it's a stall technique for yourself. Right? Because you know that if you are going to automatically respond, it won't be in the way that you want it to be, using the right words that will help foster a conversation. It will close down the conversation. So take a breath. The second step is typically to reframe the question. So if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're telling me is that my ability to submit reports on time didn't meet your expectations or didn't meet the department's expectations. I just want to be clear. Right? It makes the manager have to be more specific without you asking, but it also makes the manager think, which then of course adds more time for you. The third step in this entire process is to, after you've had some time to process this, for you to be able to offer an opposite response. You can say, well, I see what you're saying, but I can also tell you that in other instances, you actually gave me a compliment on a group call because of the work that I did and by turning in the report. And then you use that as the gold standard for what other team members should use. Am I mistaken? I just want to make sure that this correlates with this issue. And you will find, and remember, we always talk about this, right? Humans are humans. It does not matter what your title is. That manager, that supervisor also is concerned to giving this employee performance review. And so by posing it back to the manager to have to reframe it, they will also then soften their tone, which will allow you to, like Teresa said, acknowledge the parts that you were responsible for and make a commitment to be able to rectify that going forward.
Those are great pieces of advice. It really comes down to an exercise of building emotional intelligence. I think I'm going to start my next year's programs on that topic, because I myself can get heated in the moment and we get defensive and we just kind of respond just right out of the mouth. So taking that deep breath and reframing the question to get specifics, that's really, really great. And I realize that what you're hearing from our panelists, these are great suggestions that they may not be so easily implemented in the moment.
Right.
So if I could just suggest, going back to the preparation phase we just sort of talked about, is why not have a mock review meeting with a colleague or a friend where they give you negative feedback or even positive feedback and you can record it. So we can get some practice, maybe just learning how to keep your emotions in check and choosing some words more carefully. Good points. Great. All right. So responding to feedback, fun stuff. Well, there may be times when feedback is just downright ridiculous or even nefarious in nature. I mean, for instance, maybe a boss has completely unachievable expectations or is working off some unconfirmed information, or maybe even projecting their own issues onto the employee. Well, in cases where a review is inaccurate, misleading, or otherwise problematic, an employee has the right to submit a rebuttal. Yet, is there a benefit? Are there rules around the rebuttal? So, Mary, I want to come to you first, specifically with your world in HR, your knowledge there is, can you shed some light here about the benefits and even the rules or the process of around submitting a rebuttal to even have purpose?
Sure. In all the years I've, been practicing HR, we do, I think rebuttal in some cases is good. Do not leave your review meeting and run by your desk and start typing and immediately send something to your manager about how, inaccurate that review just was. I always recommend, you're leaving that meeting, you're very heated, you're very upset, emotions are flying. Take the time, breathe, go back, do your research, look at the review, what exactly transpired, and gather your information. If you're prepared, you have all of that. Go back and draft something, set up another meeting. And I encourage my folks, that's your manager. You should be speaking all year long. So a lot of these things should not be a surprise. to you. If it's that much of a miss at the review, then really you haven't been speaking all year, and a lot was missed along the way. So go back, ask your manager for a follow-up meeting, get all your thoughts documented. I mean, you don't have to present a document at that time, but set the meeting up, review everything, and then later on submit your written responses to the review, so it's in the file, it's attached. You have to come to some sort of agreement going forward with how you're going to, move forward with your manager. If there is accuracy to some of those things, you have to have a development plan or some plan going forward, and insist on that. Insist on setting up a plan to fix any of the things that need to be fixed. And then, of course, bring your examples of what did, if he said this happened, say, no, this is what really happened. A lot of times managers, you get caught up in that last 2 months of the year, and you forget the last 10 months of the whole performance review. So sometimes something does happen at the very end that, causes them to, perhaps deliver an inaccurate rating because they forgot the last 10 months and all the other good things that you've done. So, going back to being prepared, if you have all of those things, you've saved your file with all your accolades, you understand what transpired, but you're not communicating with your manager to create that inaccurate review, I think that's the time that you go back to them, ask for meetings, set up a plan. It's really important to, fix those things if you're going to continue there.
You brought up a really good point about specifics. If we're recommending that we write specifics on our performance review document, if we're going to, and we want specifics from our manager in terms of their feedback, well, where can you be more, give me an example of when that happened, what you mean when you're giving your rebuttal. It shouldn't just be an overlay of feelings, which is important, of course, but having some specifics to combat or could be a converse of what they shared, So whether it's well, this happened on this date, maybe you have some examples that you can use from an email that you did X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Yeah. Great. So Teresa, what can you add here for the rebuttal? Because I know it's a little nerve-wracking, I think, for us, because we may feel like, oh, this is just going to automatically come off as defensive and maybe it's not going to go anywhere. No one's going to read it. So what's your thoughts on submitting the rebuttal?
Well, clearly, when you're at a point where you're even referring to your response as a rebuttal, to me, there's a bigger issue here. And it probably is a reflection on the relationship you have with your manager. Now, I'm going to ask you to do something really brave. And I know your knee is going to quiver under the table when I say this. But before you write the rebuttal, I want you to have a conversation with your manager. And I'd say, I don't want to talk about the performance appraisal. I don't even really want to talk about the job. You know what I want to talk about? How we work together. Can we have a couple minutes to talk about that? I know. I can feel you already. Like the hair on the back of your neck is standing up. This is the conversation that needs to be had. Because ultimately, when you have a good working relationship with your manager, they can share constructive feedback with you that you don't feel you need to rebut. They're going to say, Teresa, you did not turn that in on time. And I'll be like, you are so right. You're so right. I really need to have a better time management process, but you don't feel offended by it. If your relationship isn't good, that's when this rebuttal thing comes into play. Now, ultimately, you may have to write the rebuttal. And if you do, it's very much from the framework. Imagine a prospective manager reading it. You want them to see you as someone that accepts feedback well and is willing to take action. And you want to write the rebuttal from that perspective. Thank you for sharing your perspective. While I didn't see it that way, clearly it's my job to change your perspective. These are the things I'm going to do. And in fact, I've added some other action plans along the way. So this is tough stuff, Lisa. Tough stuff.
It is tough. And I want to kind of throw in another question from the HR perspective. So Mary, coming back to you, when an employee submits that rebuttal and the manager reviews it,
right?
Again, I know there's no standard. What does HR do with that? I think people fear, putting in a rebuttal is going to go in my file and I'm going to be seen as a difficult employee. So I think to your point about Mary and Teresa, how you write it has to not come off appearing
Absolutely.
difficult, but if
Yes.
you write it well and you're appealing to both sides of the table. But how does HR view it? What do they do with it? And what's done after the submittal is received?
Right. I think it's, I work with both sides. So, I'll work with the manager, absolutely, because obviously there was a miss somewhere. I mean, you shouldn't come to your performance review and, it be that, where there are so many things that you disagree with if you're talking throughout the year. So obviously there was a miss. So I'll work with the manager and also with the employee to create a plan. We're fortunate here at our company. We do development plans for every employee. So, after the performance reviews are done, we do something called a 4-box, and then we move on to development plans, which is what we're doing right now. So every employee has an opportunity to, grow in an area, or if there's things that need to be, changed or improved, that all gets built into development plans. So a lot of times I have employees come into me, they're very upset about their review. I'll work with them and coach them and on the right way to respond to the manager. I mean, we want to create, a team here and coach both of them through that. But you're right, it's very difficult because emotions are high and it's really sometimes hard to figure out what was the disconnect. And I say it all the time. It's not a surprise. You have to talk all year long. We do one-to-ones too, which I think are key in building, the relationship between the manager and the employee, and also, with the performance throughout the year. So you have, we're ensuring that there are constant conversations about development, about improvement, about performance. So we don't have these situations because they're tough. It's tough to deal with that, disconnect at the performance review.
That's a great point. And I want to encourage everyone on this call, let's face it, we're talking somewhat generally for these questions so we can give everyone something to take away. But if you've got a specific situation that's going on with your boss or even a coworker that you've experienced in the past, even particularly this year, and you're expecting some sort of conversation around that in this review, throw it in the chat box here. If you've got a question that's specific to your world, you don't have to name names, of course, but want to make sure that we can address some of your questions because everyone's got their own unique boss, their own unique speaking style, their own unique performance review process at their company. So again, we're talking generally, but I'd love to address some of your specific questions. Speaking of questions, all right, now let's talk about the outcome. Let's say the review is over now, right? What do you do next? I think it's time to think about next moves. The meeting could have gone one of two ways. So let's address the one way. Let's say it wasn't what you hoped for. Is it possible to turn that review, that negative review, into a positive situation? So Iqbal, I want to come back to you. Can you advise our listeners as to how they can leverage a poor review outcome to their advantage and positively impact their career?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the more nuanced conversations that associates have to become very comfortable with, because whether it's the overall evaluation or some specific quality on the eval or competency that they may have gotten a development needed, it needs to be demonstrated in a way and communicated in a way where transparency is key, objectives are outlined, and support is requested. So let's take, for example, a less than stellar or less than average overall performance evaluation. I think the first thing is both Teresa and Mary have pointed out, like if there's an element of that competency that you did not give 100% on, take ownership of it. Acknowledge that this was an element that maybe slipped under the radar because you were focused on other things, but it's still my fault. And that's something that I'm going to keep as a high priority for the next quarter, the next 2 quarters. The other piece, which is very important, is to be very clear in the language that you use with your supervisor as to where you see yourself in the next 3, 6, and 12 months. I feel that in the conversations I had with my employees and with my associates, I had to do a lot of digging to understand, well, where do you see yourself, right? Why can't an associate say, listen, that I have really wanted to move into a manager role. And I am still ascribing to that aspiration. I really want your help. And listening or looking at this evaluation, I feel that while there are some good things, there are still areas of improvement for me. What I would like to do is schedule a regular conversation with you to address that particular subject, that particular area, that perception of deficiency that you have. I want to showcase to you what I can do to get better. And then I need your feedback. I want your honest feedback to help me do that. If there is career advancement aspirations and goals for the employee, they should literally say that in that conversation. So that way the manager, there's no second guessing, what does this person want to do? If that's not the case and they are very satisfied in their position, state that as well. I really love this company, the values that it has, the initiatives that it's taken. Being a part of this team helps give me and provide for me self-value and self-worth. I really see my future in this role and with this department. How is it that I can help, overcome this piece and at the same time help our department advance and grow? Those are the types of statements and conversations that help a manager recognize both sincerity, authenticity, vulnerability, and requests for support that make a manager says, got it. We're going to make sure that this is addressed. And the last piece I will add is this. I think a lot of time employees will walk away from a performance evaluation, whether it's a quarterly or an annual one. And they will, of course, in some cases harbor some resentment. But I think the reality of it is that the manager himself or herself does not have any animosity towards you. This person wants to see you succeed. And in that vein, there is a spirit of cooperation that can be formed through that conversation. The other thing is they're also very busy people. You as an employee have 100 tasks, 100 responsibilities, 100 relationships to manage. Now multiply that for your manager with the same number of associates plus their own 100. I say that because if you can be deliberate in your conversation and schedule regular meetings with your manager, it's going to be an item that the manager wants resolved in your favor and off of their plate. I find that to be a very valuable tool.
Yeah, that's a great point to sort of turn it around. So take what you've received from the review, the comments, the feedback, the constructive feedback. If you're just getting negative feedback, then yes, you have to get the specifics, but to take that constructive advice and apply it to your performance and your own growth, then they'll see that you are advancing. Well, first of all, you're open to the feedback, that you can apply it, that you're learning, and that will absolutely impact your career positively. And some of the things that you just mentioned, Iqbal, kind of starts to hint at the answer to a question that we just got from one of our guests here. Said, how can you solicit interest in your development from your supervisor? And how can you develop that rapport with the supervisor even before the review? So Mary, I want to take that to you. So talking about it from a positive perspective, what else can you do to solicit that interest from your manager in your own development?
I think, you have to be, proactive and schedule perhaps, if it's a company that doesn't do one-to-ones, recommend that you meet monthly, at least monthly, if not, depending on where you are, what position it is, to stimulate those conversations, create a development plan. These are the things, whether it's positive or negative, these are the things that I'd like to do. I've got a great review. You're walking out, you're sky high, it was wonderful, but you want to not take your foot off the gas, right? You want that to continue. So encourage those meetings with the manager. I think communication is key. You have to, set goals, set opportunities, figure out what can be done, what growth there is in the company. You don't have to grow on the career ladder to have opportunity, right? You can get opportunity in many different ways. So create that path for you. Be proactive. Don't hide, from it. I think, stimulate that conversation with the manager, request monthly meetings, and come with a plan. Don't just expect them to set it up. Come with some sort of outline as to what, you're looking to improve, looking to grow, and looking for opportunity.
That is the ownership part right there. No one is responsible for your own growth but yourself, but you can get your manager involved. You just have to help them help you.
Right.
So one of the suggestions that I give to my clients when I'm coaching is that you go into that review with 3 pages of your own review, what you've accomplished, the results, so there's contributions there, and then what you want to do next. So you can start leading that conversation towards the growth. And it simply comes down to asking for it, right?
It's great.
Yeah. Great stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've heard some practical and unique strategies for completing the self-review, preparing for the conversation, responding to feedback, writing a rebuttal, and sharing your own growth development. Well, now let's consider, after the outcome, how do you improve your next experience? I want to sort of look to that future. This is my last question for the day, but hopefully you've got more that you're going to chime in here in our audience. But let's think about that future. There are certainly more appraisals to come. So, Teresa, how can you advise our listeners to take ownership for ensuring that their next review experience is a positive one?
I've got advice that I would give to both the receiver and also the same advice I give to the manager. Make the most of those one-on-one conversations. If you, I've seen people go to their manager one-on-one conversation and they just wait for their manager to ask questions and they answer them. Go in there with your own list. Go in there with your own list and say, Mary, do you want me to go first or do you want to go first? Mary said, Teresa, you go first. All right, here's some things. Last time we talked, this. That way, it's a partnership in that one-on-one. It's not just your manager bestowing questions and information to you. Follow up to those one-on-ones. Mary, it was great to chat with you today. 2 of my biggest takeaways were going forward, blah, blah, blah. And by the next time we chat, I will have this done. Own those one-on-ones. That to me is where the rubber hits the road. Now there may be somebody who is with us today who's saying, Teresa, I don't even have one-on-ones with my manager. And this makes me sad. I'm crying a little bit. It makes me sad. But some managers say, well, we talk and I know what you're doing and we can ask questions. Here's the thing. You are driving your career bus. So even if your manager says, oh, we don't have to have formal one-on-ones, as best you can, set up meetings yourself, call it a check-in, call it a project review, but make that your one-on-one. And if you can't even get that, periodically just send a note saying, hey, I just want to make sure you know where I am on all of these things. If you have any questions, let's set up a meeting. That way, you are still preparing yourself and the manager for this ultimate performance review that you're going to get. And not just leaving it to chance. Don't just throw your hands up and say, well, they won't have one-on-ones. And that's terrible. It is. But you have to drive your career bus. I can't emphasize that enough. So there's my thought. I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking.
Yeah, I love it. Iqbal, let's add to that. That's some good juice there.
Yeah, it's hard to top that, Teresa, but I will say 1 or 2 things, right? Like we talked about stories earlier. And of course, if these one-on-ones aren't happening, drive it, right? Like these are things that you can own. But I think it's also important to be able to ask pointed questions that are relevant to 3 different levels, right? Ask questions that will either help you understand or help contribute to your own development, your supervisor's development, and your company's values.
Nice.
You should know your company's values, and if not, that's okay. You can go find out what they are, look at the mission, look at the vision, look at the strategies, look at the initiatives, and recognize like, hey, as an entity, this is what we're working to do. We work to, help patients get the best medication at the fastest speed at the lowest cost, right? Just a make-up example of what a company mission might look like. Great. What are you doing to contribute to the company's mission? Then you can look at your supervisor and says, okay, supervisor, you're responsible for 5, 10, 15, 20 people on this team that are dedicated to the IT side of, interfacing with patients. What is the supervisor responsible for and how can you help them? Right? These are ways that you can literally add value to both the entity, the organization, different individuals so that they recognize, wow, You have these skill sets, right? And these are the skill sets that were brought up in your evaluation. Because I have never attended, I have never delivered, and I have never received a performance evaluation where my manager didn't at least call out one positive strength that they recognized in me. Build on that. Use that and says, hey, listen, these are the 3 things that you said that I do very well. I want to just tell you what I've done for the company. I know that we've been promoting this particular initiative. Well, on social media, on LinkedIn, on Twitter or Instagram, I promoted this particular post, and this is the responses I received back, and I directed them to so-and-so. These are stories that you will be able to drive. And in the process, when your next review shows up, these are things that have already laid a foundation for a positive conversation.
When I'm hearing all those positive points that you're suggesting we bring up and talking about ourselves, because what is it? It's talking about ourselves. And I hear a lot when I'm in coaching, I feel like I'm bragging. I'm sure you've heard people say that. And it's not about getting on your soapbox and beating your chest and saying I'm the best employee. But if you're not able to share your contributions from an individual and a team-based perspective, and your manager's not seeing it, quote unquote, seeing it, then you're not going to get recognized. So Mary, I want to ask that, throw that one question back to you is, if you have someone that sort of feels they're not comfortable with touting their accomplishments, what advice would you give to them?
You have to be your own advocate. Think about a manager who has 10 direct reports and has to do 10 of these reviews and keep up with 10 folks and what they're doing. I mean, you have to be your own advocate. You have to, go back and absolutely gloat at to what you've done. I mean, you want to be the best you can be, right? And if you have all of those examples and you're doing those things, there's nothing wrong with going back to the manager and gently reminding them of all of those great things you've done. Absolutely. You don't gloat about it, but you make sure they're aware of all of those great things.
All right, you blend the I versus the we into your conversation.
Of course, all part of a team, right? So the team has done great things. So,
Right.
Bring all of that to the manager. Sure.
And I have a sort of final suggestion. This is somewhat, I guess, tactical, if you will, because you think about if you wait till the end of the year and now you want to prepare your performance review, maybe even get your resume ready for internal, external opportunities, trying to remember everything throughout the year. It's incredibly challenging. We can't even remember what we had for lunch yesterday. So what I often advise my clients is to develop their own tracking process. Whatever you use to track your work, Outlook calendar, your phone, maybe you've got memos, lists in your phone. I don't care if it's Excel spreadsheet. Give yourself a monthly reminder. Literally put an entry into your calendar and says, track accomplishments, track work today, and spend, 30 minutes to just look down and look through your papers, your emails, and jot down what is the work that I finished, what is the work the results of my work, how did it contribute to my team, my department, my company. And if you do that once a month, it could be handwritten, you can type it, doesn't have to be anything formal until you do a performance review. Now you have that document ready at any time if you do need to have that one-on-one with your boss and keep them in tune to what you've done. And certainly when it's coming down to the review in the end. So I think tracking your accomplishments and your achievements throughout the year on a monthly basis and giving yourself that reminder can relieve some of the stress of trying to scramble and finding through. Because I can't tell you how many people say to me, oh, I don't have access to that report anymore. Oh, I don't know what that person said and I can't scramble through the emails. I actually have on my emails, my inbox, a little thing that's called a file called testimonials.
Yes.
For my clients. You could do that for yourself and call it communication, emails from, and you can just sort of track. You get a client that sends you a kudos thumbs up. Your boss sends you something nice. Anyone, throw it into that little inbox. So at the end, now you have this trail of proof of what you've done. And if you want trail of proof that your boss says you didn't do X, but you did, you also have a trail of it there. So keep a trail of your accomplishments and your contributions. Excuse me. Teresa, you wanted to add something to that?
I have a file called Kudos, Lisa. And it's funny because I don't even get performance appraisals anymore, but I still keep all of my positive notes in a folder. Now, testimonials is good, and probably that's what I should call it now that I'm on the outside as a consultant. But I just file them in the kudos folder. And now if I have a bad day, I open it up and realize just how awesome I am.
That's great.
Right? I need that.
That's such a good point. Sometimes I'll read something that someone shared and I'm like, oh, it brightens my day to know that I had a good impact. And I want to remind everyone on this call is quite often we don't realize that we have an impact on results. I think even as a custodian, you have an impact on the company's success. So if you're struggling with thinking about how you've contributed, go look at your departmental reports, your company annual reports, see if you can get access to sales reports, anything that you can really get your hands on to say, okay, our department increased productivity by X%. We generated this number of new clients this quarter. Or, all right, we went down in sales, but we went up in the Twitter feed, because maybe you're a social media kind of based company. Do consider your direct contributions and also your indirect contributions, because everything you do may not have a quantifiable result, but it definitely has a qualifiable result. So keep track of that all. Yeah. All right. Well, I want to give everyone, we have a few minutes left, questions that are coming up in your mind, throw it in the chat. And while I'm waiting for questions, I want to know if you have one final thought, Mary, that you want to give to our audience on making the review successful this year and moving forward. You want to sum something up for us?
Sure. Don't think of it as, that terrible time that I absolutely hate. It's actually your time to, summarize what went on through the year, shine. Don't look at it as a negative. Make it a positive situation. Look forward to the review. Spend the time. And if you're prepared and have all your notes, and it's easy. And don't take the self-evaluation as something that is just a formality or something I have to do. That I tell my team here, that is a great document. It helps with the two-way conversation. It ensures that the employee is prepared. So it helps facilitate that two-way conversation. So spend the time. I see them come across my desk sometimes and it's, an NA on some of the questions. I mean, that's not acceptable. Take the
right.
time.
If you want to have influence, get involved.
You own your own destiny. Yeah. So, you're your own advocate. So, so absolutely don't miss out on that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we've got a nice question here from Annie. She says, should you discuss increases and raises during the performance review? So really, when is a sweet spot to discuss that? And I know it's going to be different based on every company, but love to get your thoughts on that, Iqbal.
So in my experience, especially having worked for two major companies that already have a pretty structured structured format, I would always receive and I would always give my performance evaluations either the morning thereof or a day before in advance. So they knew what was expected. And in that conversation at the very end, we would discuss performance-based pay raises. And so if it's something that your company does not do at the very tail end, depending upon the outcome of your evaluation, I think it's a fair opportunity for you to introduce the question. I think it's absolutely legitimate for you to say, listen, you think that I did a really good job this year? I agree. I'm really proud of the accomplishments that we've done together as a team. What does that look like from a financial reward or financial incentive perspective? Does the company have something like that, right? Ask probing questions to learn what the company has already outlined. And then if it matches what your expectations are, great. If not, you can always ask a deeper question. Like, so are there exceptions that are made for certain metrics that might have been reached? So for example, I did this year, 100% above what company goal was. Is that something that maybe you hand out, like, performance awards? Having that discussion, especially at the tail end of a positive review, much easier to do. At the tail end of a less than average, it's probably something to consider at your next interview or at your next evaluation. And that should be, your monthly conversation.
That's a really helpful language that you provided for that question, because it is touchy to kind of bring it up on yourself. So I appreciate that. I think I now, out of today's conversation, have come up with at least 3 new webinar topics for my early start of next year. And one of them is definitely going to be on negotiation. So thank you. And if I could add to that, we'll sort of end off on that. If you are bringing up that conversation, it's really helpful, especially if you had a positive review, like you said, it's really helpful to go into that conversation knowing what you're worth in the market. So do some research to know what your level is getting qualified for in terms of compensation. You got salary, bonus, etc. in your market, at your level, in your city, state, because it will be different where you live. But arm yourself with some knowledge and information. You can Google salary averages for folks in your field. So you have some of that background based on what you bring to the table. You'll have a stronger confidence in the ask.
Lisa, I'd also add on one more piece to that part, right? So Glassdoor and PayScale are really some phenomenal resources that provides that type of information.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely, Iqbal. That's a great point. Be careful as to what you're using, because, you know, some of those sites, it's only what information is put in. So something like PayScale is a bit more of a bigger site. So, you know, the information is a bit more accurate than some of those other ones out there.
Great. Teresa, 30-second final thoughts?
I just think own it. If I had to summarize it, it's own it. This performance review is about you. You want to manage your brand, and you want to continue your career bus going in a direction you want it to go in. Mary, you totally took my idea, because that is the mindset. When you go into your performance evaluation, go in looking forward to it. We're going to talk about a whole year of work that you did. Hopefully you enjoy the work you do, the company you work for. That mindset is going to bring an energy to the conversation, even if you get constructive feedback. So definitely mindset is important. Don't dread this thing. Don't dread it. It should be something you look forward to.
That's great final thoughts on making it a positive experience next year around. Well, folks, we have hit our hour mark. This has been a truly engaging hour. As we close, I want to thank Iqbal, Teresa, and Mary for their time and incredible insights. And I want to thank you all for joining us and participating. The conversation does not have to end here. I encourage you to network with our panel, to connect with me via email, LinkedIn, or Facebook, and subscribe to the Careers Advance YouTube channel for the other content recordings. And on that note, we'll be offering more free webinars next year, so keep an eye out, keep in touch, because when we work together, everyone's mission is possible. Happy holidays, everyone. Let's crush it in 2021.